I sitting on the cold wooden bench of the courtroom, my fingers trembling around the edge of the folder I had held onto like it could save me. My lawyer whispered something, but I didn't catch it. All I could hear was the clicking of heels, his new wife, walking in like this was some kind of fashion show, and behind her was him, my ex, smirking, confident, like he had already won. The judge hadn't even entered yet, but I already felt like I had lost everything. The custody of my kids, my life, my dignity. He turned slightly, just enough so only I could hear him. "You should have stayed quiet, Amanda. Now you'll see what real pain feels like." It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that. For years he had this way of speaking so calmly, so charmingly in public, while making sure I was slowly breaking inside. He knew how to twist the knife with a smile. He was good at it. Too good. Like that night he showed up late for our son's birthday, drunk, blaming traffic, then screaming at me in front of the kids because the cake was too dry. I remember standing in the kitchen, silent, holding my breath so the kids wouldn't see me cry. That had been 2 years ago, but some scars don't fade. Now, here we were, a courtroom full of strangers waiting to decide whether I was fit to be a mother. His lawyer stood up and started reading from a list, things I had supposedly done. Most of it twisted truths, things taken out of context. One of them was that I let our son Michael skip school. He had a 102-degree fever. But no, in his version, I was neglectful, unfit. I glanced at Michael. He was sitting next to a social worker, looking so small, so unsure. He was holding something in his hand, a folded paper. I didn't know what it was. I didn't ask. I just kept praying. I thought about every late night I'd stayed up with him, holding his hand during nightmares, every scraped knee I'd kissed, every morning I walked him to school even when I had no sleep, and now this man, who barely knew his own son's teacher's name, was about to take him from me. The judge finally looked my way. "Do you have anything to say in your defense, Ms. Reyes?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My voice had buried itself somewhere deep under the weight of years of intimidation. That's when it happened. Michael stood up, slowly, carefully. He whispered something to the social worker, who looked at the judge and nodded. The judge raised an eyebrow and said, "Let the child speak." My heart stopped. Michael walked to the center of the room, holding that folded piece of paper like it was everything. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. He looked at me once, then at his father, and finally began to read. "Dear Mom," he started. "I wrote this 2 weeks ago but didn't know when to show you. I saw Dad yelling at you last time he picked me up. He didn't know I was listening. He said you were too weak to fight back, that he'd take me and make sure you'd never see me again. I cried that night, but I didn't tell you. I didn't want to make it worse." There was a gasp from someone in the back. My ex shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. Michael continued, his voice shaking but growing steadier with every word. "You always told me to be brave, so I'm being brave now. I don't want to live with Dad. He's not the same when no one's watching. He's mean, and he lies. But you? You never lied. Even when you were sad, you smiled at me. You made me feel safe. That's why I want to stay with you. Please don't let him take me." The room was silent. Dead silent. My ex's lawyer froze like she'd been slapped. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. That was the moment everything changed. It wasn't just a letter, it was a truth bomb, and it had just blown up right in the middle of his perfect plan. But even then, I didn't relax. Because I knew him. I knew he wouldn't give up that easily. And I was right. Because just when the judge asked for a recess, my ex stood up and said, "Your Honor, that boy's been coached. She's been feeding him lies. I want him evaluated by a therapist. And if you allow that letter as evidence, I'll bring something that proves she's mentally unstable." And just like that, the atmosphere shifted again. My lawyer whispered, "We need to be very careful from here." But I wasn't listening anymore. My eyes were on Michael, my little boy, who stood there brave as a soldier and looked right at the man who had made our lives hell and didn't flinch. That moment lit something inside me. This wasn't just a custody battle anymore. It was war, and I was done playing nice. I walked out into the hallway with Michael after the judge called for a 30-minute recess. The cold air outside the courtroom felt like needles against my skin, but I welcomed it. Anything to stay grounded. Michael sat beside me on the wooden bench, his small fingers still clinging to the now creased letter. I tried to smile at him, but the edges of my lips wouldn't lift. My mind was spinning. He had said it, out loud, in front of everyone. And yet, it wasn't over. My ex had turned the tables within seconds, accusing me of manipulating my own son. Classic. Just like always. When things didn't go his way, he flipped the narrative, and he was good at it. That's what scared me the most. Not the lies he told, but how easily people believed him. Michael leaned his head on my shoulder. "Did I mess up, Mom?" I froze. "No, baby. You didn't mess up. You were amazing." But Dad looked mad. I took a breath. "I know, but you told the truth, and no one ever gets in trouble for that." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't always true. Not in the real world. Not when your ex had a charm that could wrap around the judge's bench and squeeze. Back in the courtroom, I watched as his lawyer slid a file across the table. She had a new smirk now, like she'd just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. The judge lifted the folder, brows furrowed. My lawyer tried to peek, but the judge waved her off for the moment. "This," his lawyer said, "is a written statement from a licensed therapist who previously worked with Amanda Reyes, stating that she exhibited signs of chronic emotional instability and unresolved trauma." I felt like the floor cracked beneath me. That therapist. She was someone I saw nearly 3 years ago after the separation. I only went for 3 sessions, just enough to admit that I was exhausted, confused, and scared of my future. It wasn't a diagnosis, it was me trying to put myself back together. And now, here it was, used like a weapon. "I'd like to request a full psychological evaluation of Ms. Reyes before the custody decision is finalized," the lawyer added. My lawyer shot up. "Your Honor, that's not only an ambush, this document is out of context and highly unethical. If we're dragging therapy records into this, we'd like to subpoena Mr. Landon's own sessions." The judge sighed. "I'll allow both sides to submit mental health evaluations, voluntarily. I'll not be swayed by one-sided evidence." Michael looked at me, confused. I gave him a nod to let him know it was okay. But it wasn't okay. Because even if we both knew the truth, I also knew how easily truth got buried under paperwork and polished lies. After the hearing ended for the day, we stepped outside. The sky was gray, heavy with rain that hadn't fallen yet. My lawyer walked beside me, talking strategy, but I wasn't listening. My ex walked past with his new wife, hand in hand, both of them laughing. Loudly. On purpose. That's when I saw her. The woman who had once been my best friend, Carla. She worked at the courthouse now. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since she started dating a guy my ex introduced her to. But now she stood at the top of the steps, watching me. Our eyes met for just a second. She looked away. Inside the car, Michael finally spoke. "Mom, why does he hate you so much?" I didn't know what to say. Because you stood up to him? Because you didn't stay broken? Because you finally said no? I just held his hand tighter. That night, while he slept, I sat on the kitchen floor with that same folder from court. Inside it, tucked between custody forms and financial records, was something I hadn't looked at in months, a journal entry I wrote during the divorce. My hand trembled as I read it. It was about the night I left, how I packed a bag for Michael while my ex was at work, how I left a note that said, "I'm not your punching bag," and how I cried all the way to my sister's house. And yet here I was, still fighting the same fight. The next day, we went back to court. This time, I came ready. I brought documents, photos, emails, everything I had carefully saved in case this day ever came. My lawyer laid them out with precision, her voice calm but cutting. I watched my ex's face slowly change from confidence to calculation, and then, just as we were about to rest our case, Michael stood up again. The judge looked at him, surprised. "Do you have something else to say?" Michael walked over, pulled something from his backpack, and held it out. It was a drawing, just a simple crayon sketch, but it said everything. On one side, a small stick figure holding a balloon. smiling. On the other side, a tall figure, face full of angry scribbles, yelling. Above it, in a child's writing, were 4 words, "I want my mom." My lawyer didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The judge looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked at me. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that gave me hope. Empathy. And just like that, the balance of power shifted again. But I knew it wasn't the end. Because people like my ex don't lose quietly. And I was right. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "You think that drawing wins you the war? You haven't seen what I can really do." And attached was a photo. One I hadn't seen before. Me. At a party. Years ago. Drunk. Laughing with a stranger. And suddenly, everything was spinning again. I stared at the photo for a long time, the phone trembling in my hand. It was blurry, the lighting poor, but my face was unmistakable. Younger, happier, careless. I was wearing a black dress I hadn't touched in years, holding a red cup in one hand and throwing my head back in laughter. The man next to me? I couldn't even remember his name. It was before Michael. Before the marriage. But I knew exactly why that photo had been sent now. It was a threat. Not a loud, screaming one. Number. It was the kind he specialized in. The kind that whispered just loud enough to make your heart race. I hadn't seen that photo in nearly 10 years, and now it was being used as a weapon. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that picture being printed, enlarged, and handed to the judge with a smug smile. I opened my laptop and went down a rabbit hole, every message, every folder, every cloud account I could think of. I needed to know what else he might have, what other ghosts from my past he'd dig up, and as I searched, I found an old email, sent to me from his account 6 years ago. The subject line was blank. The body had just one sentence, "Keep this up, and I'll bury you." I remembered that day. We'd had a fight about something small. I think it was about me not answering his call while I was at work, and that was his response. It never made sense at the time. It felt dramatic, overblown. But now, looking at it with everything else, it felt like a breadcrumb, like he'd been laying a trail of threats for years, just in case he ever needed them. The next morning, the courtroom felt colder than before. My lawyer was already waiting, holding her phone. Her jaw was clenched. "He's filed a motion to include a character witness," she said. "Someone from your past." I didn't even have to ask who, because as I turned toward the door, I saw her. Carla. The same Carla who had once cried in my lap after her own breakup. The same Carla I had trusted with every secret, every vulnerable moment. Now she walked in, avoiding my eyes, and sat beside his lawyer. It felt like a punch to the gut. The judge called the room to order, and everything went quiet. My ex's lawyer stood, calm and rehearsed. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Carla Medina to the stand. She has known Ms. Reyes for over 10 years and can speak to her behavior, both before and after the separation." I watched Carla walk up, sit down, and place her hand on the Bible. She didn't even flinch. "Ms. Medina," the lawyer began, "can you tell the court about Amanda Reyes's emotional state during the time you knew her?" Carla looked down, then up, and began. "She was fragile. I remember her being impulsive. She would cry suddenly, even in public. Once she threw her phone against the wall during a party. People were scared, and she talked a lot about feeling watched, like someone was always out to get her." My breath caught. She was using my own trauma against me. Things I had said in confidence, things I had whispered while trying to stay sane. I looked at her, silently begging her to stop, but she didn't meet my eyes. "She also drank a lot during that time," she added, "and sometimes she'd go quiet for days, not answering calls or texts. Honestly, I worried about her ability to cope." The lawyer nodded, as if everything was going exactly as planned. But then something strange happened. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Medina, are you aware that Ms. Reyes was attending therapy during this period?" Carla blinked. She never told me that." The judge glanced at a document. "She began sessions 2 months after her separation and continued them for 4 months. During that time, she was diagnosed with PTSD stemming from emotional abuse. Carla looked stunned. I didn't know that. Did you ever witness Mr. Landon's behavior toward Ms. Reyes? Carla hesitated. Well, no. I mean, he was always polite around me. The judge's face was unreadable. You may step down. As Carla walked back to her seat, I saw it. The flicker of guilt on her face, the way her fingers fidgeted with her bracelet. Maybe she didn't know she was being used, or maybe she did, and it was too late to back out. During the next break, I sat in the hallway, numb. Michael was at school. My phone buzzed again. Another message. No words this time, just a video. I tapped it. The footage was grainy. It was from the same party as the photo, me laughing, spinning, joking with someone off camera. But this time there was a voice layered over the clip. My ex's voice. This is who she really is. Unstable, irresponsible, dangerous. The manipulation wasn't subtle anymore. It was bold, confident, and I knew then that he wasn't just trying to win custody, he was trying to erase me. But that night, I got a message from someone unexpected. Carla. It said, I didn't know he recorded you. He showed me the video and said if I didn't testify, he'd release something about me too. I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far. I stared at her message, emotions choking me from the inside. Anger, betrayal, but beneath it all, understanding. He'd done to her what he'd done to me, turned fear into control. I took a screenshot of the message, and I sent it to my lawyer. Because if he wanted to play dirty, he just handed me the proof. And this time, I wasn't going to let him walk away clean. The following morning, as I walked into the courtroom, the weight of the last few days hit me again. I hadn't slept. I couldn't eat. I kept replaying every move, every word, wondering if I was doing enough to fight back, if my son's words, my evidence, my lawyer's strategy would be enough to stop him. But nothing could prepare me for the moment the judge called me back to the stand. It was my turn now. I stepped up, my legs shaky beneath me. The room seemed to shrink with every step I took. I tried to steady my breath, but I could feel the sweat on my palms. The cold stare of my ex from the front row pierced through me. He was still sitting there, looking as calm and confident as he had on day one. The smirk hadn't left his face, not even after all the accusations, all the lies. The judge asked me to raise my hand. I did, and then I took a seat under the harsh glare of the spotlight. He asked the standard questions, but my mind was elsewhere, on the message from Carla, on the video my ex had sent me, on every lie I knew he was about to throw at me. But then, the questions started. Ms. Reyes, the lawyer began, can you explain the nature of your relationship with Mr. Landon during the marriage? I nodded. It was complicated, I said, my voice steady but small. He wasn't always like the person you see today. But over time, things changed. He became controlling, manipulative. I couldn't do anything without him turning it against me. I was isolated. It was suffocating. The lawyer scribbled something down. And would you say you were emotionally unstable during the marriage? I felt the sting in the question, but I had to stay calm. I had moments of vulnerability, yes, but I wasn't unstable. I was reacting to his behavior, to the things he said, to the things he did. And can you explain the accusations against you for child neglect? The claim that you allowed your son to skip school? I swallowed hard, trying to keep the shakiness out of my voice. That day, my son was sick, feverish. I kept him home because I didn't want to send him to school while he was unwell. It wasn't neglect. It was care. The lawyer gave a condescending smile. But you see, Ms. Reyes, your son didn't just miss school that day. He missed several days throughout the past year. I felt my heart beat faster. I didn't know how they had this information. Had my ex been tracking me, watching every move I made? I'm sure there were days my son stayed home, I said, trying to keep my voice level. But I always made sure he was safe and well. If there were days I kept him home, it was because I believed that was what was best for him. The lawyer's smile widened. And now, let's talk about your history with alcohol. You've been known to drink heavily in the past. Do you deny that? I froze. They were going for the jugular. but I couldn't let them break me. Not now. I took a deep breath. Yes, I had struggles with alcohol after the divorce. It wasn't easy, being alone and managing everything, but I've been sober for over a year now. I took control of my life, of my mistakes, and I'm stronger for it, but that's not who I am now. Interesting, the lawyer said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. So, would you agree that you're still working on your instability? I clenched my fists beneath the table, fighting to keep my composure. I'm still healing, but I am stable, I am capable, and I have every right to be a mother to my son. There was a brief silence. The lawyer turned to the judge, her eyes filled with triumph. It felt like they were trying to paint me as weak, incapable, and I couldn't let that happen. I had to make him see me for who I was now, not who I had been. The judge looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Ms. Reyes. You may step down." I left the stand, my knees weak. I wanted to scream, to shout that I was not the woman they were painting me to be, but I kept walking back to my seat. I looked at Michael, sitting quietly in the front row, clutching his drawing in his hands. I smiled at him, but he didn't smile back. His eyes were wide, and I knew he was scared. Then, the final twist came. Just when I thought it was over, my ex stood up. His voice filled the courtroom, calm and calculated. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit a new piece of evidence into the record." I stared at him, my stomach sinking. What else could he possibly have? He handed a document to the judge. The judge looked at it, and then at me. "Ms. Reyes, are you aware of this?" I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. It was another photo, one I hadn't seen before, and this one was worse than anything they had shown so far. It was a shot of me, taken in the kitchen, at my lowest. I was crying, my face a mess of mascara streaks, holding a bottle of wine in my hand. The caption beneath it read, "The truth behind the mask. A mother who can't even handle her own emotions, let alone raise a child." My chest tightened. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to disappear. "This is a photo from a personal camera," my ex's lawyer said, "taken in Ms. Reyes's home. It's clear she wasn't in a condition to care for her child." It was an old photo, a moment of weakness, a vulnerable point in my life, but in that moment, it felt like the walls were closing in. I had no idea where this would lead. I looked at Michael again. His small face was so full of fear and confusion. He didn't understand what was happening, and I hated that he had to witness this. But what he didn't know was that I would fight. I would fight with every ounce of strength I had left. The judge turned the photo over and studied it for a long time. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he placed it on the desk in front of him. "I will take all of this into consideration," the judge said, "but I'm concerned with the welfare of the child in this case. I'm ordering a full evaluation of both parents by a licensed child psychologist. This will determine who is fit to have primary custody." A full evaluation. I could feel the ground shifting under me once again. He wasn't ruling in my favor. Not yet. But he wasn't handing victory to my ex either. We were stuck in limbo. And the fight was far from over. As I walked out of the courtroom with Michael by my side, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. The worst part was still to come. But I would be ready. The days after the court hearing blurred into one another. I was exhausted. The emotional weight was crushing, but I couldn't afford to give in. Every time I looked at Michael, I saw the same fear in his eyes, the fear I had worked so hard to shield him from. I couldn't fail him now, not when he was counting on me to be the one person who would always protect him. The evaluation would take weeks, weeks of uncertainty, of having to play nice with my ex when all I wanted to do was scream. But I didn't. I kept my head down, kept my movements calculated. The therapist assigned to the case doctor, Jensen, would visit our home soon, and that meant I had to make sure everything was perfect, not just for the evaluation, but for my son. I wanted him to feel safe in his own home, not like he was being scrutinized. It was a Friday when Dr. Jensen came. Michael was in his room, probably drawing or playing with his toys, the way he always did when he needed an escape. He didn't need to see what was happening right now, and I wasn't going to let him. Not when there was still so much at stake. Dr. Jensen was calm, professional, but her eyes missed nothing. She watched every little detail, the way I interacted with Michael, the way he responded to me. She asked me questions that felt too personal, questions I wasn't ready to answer, but I forced myself to stay composed. I couldn't afford to let any cracks show. Not now. But just as I thought the worst was over, she dropped a bombshell. She turned to me after an hour of talking and said, "Ms. Reyes, I need to ask you something. There are concerns about your emotional stability that I believe need further evaluation. You've mentioned struggles with alcohol in the past, but you also hinted at other issues, like the PTSD diagnosis. These are important things for me to consider." I froze. The weight of her words hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't prepared for this. Not now. Not when I had done everything in my power to be better. But there it was. My past. The things I tried to bury, coming back to haunt me again. "I've been in therapy for a year," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm sober now. I'm working through everything. I just need the time to keep healing." For my son, Dr. Jensen nodded but didn't offer much comfort. "It's a process, Ms. Reyes. It's clear you care about your son, but the court needs to be sure that you are in a stable position to provide him with the care he needs. I'll need to speak with Michael, too." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her I was stable, that I was stronger than I had been in years. But instead, I nodded. I had no choice but to play along. The evaluation was now in full swing, and there was no turning back. When Dr. Jensen left, I collapsed onto the couch, my hands shaking. What had I done wrong? Was it the time I had taken to heal? Was it the things I'd shared in my therapy sessions, things I had hoped to put behind me? My mind raced as I tried to make sense of everything. Michael came into the room just then, his small face lined with worry. He had overheard the conversation. I could see it in his eyes. He was scared, too. "Mom, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "Everything's fine, honey. Don't worry about it." He didn't seem convinced, but he nodded. "Okay. But can we go get ice cream? I want chocolate. A big one." I laughed softly, wiping the tears I hadn't realized had fallen. "Yeah, we can do that." But even as I took him out for ice cream, even as I smiled for his sake, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were slipping out of my control. The court date was looming again. I could feel it in my bones. The final decision was getting closer, and the stakes were higher than ever. Weeks passed, and with every day the pressure mounted. I kept trying to prove to everyone, including myself, that I was capable. But the more I pushed, the more I realized how much was riding on the final evaluation. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting for my life, for my future, for the one person who had always been there, my son. Then came the day of the final hearing. The air was thick with tension, and the courtroom felt colder than it had before. I knew that Dr. Jensen's report would play a major role in the judge's decision. I couldn't control what she would say, but I could control what I did next. I walked into the courtroom, my heart in my throat. Michael was sitting in the front row again, staring at me with wide eyes. My ex was already there, sitting with his lawyer, looking confident. Too confident. The judge called the room to order, and I took my seat, my hands clenched in my lap. The noise in the room faded as I focused on the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. And then Dr. Jensen was called to the stand. I held my breath as she gave her report, outlining her observations. She spoke about my struggles with alcohol, about the therapy I had undergone, about the fears she still had for my emotional stability. But she also mentioned something else. "She has shown considerable progress in her therapy," Dr. Jensen said. "I believe that Amanda Reyes is on the path to recovery. However, there are still concerns about her ability to fully manage the emotional demands of raising a child without further support." My stomach dropped. This wasn't the glowing recommendation I had hoped for. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg the judge to see how far I had come, how much I had fought to get here. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my voice shaking, but I forced the words out. "Your Honor, I know I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, but I'm doing everything I can to be the best mother I can be. I'm working every day to be stronger for my son. He deserves that, and I deserve the chance to prove it to him." The judge didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. The silence was suffocating. And then, finally, he spoke. "I will take everything into consideration," he said, his voice neutral. "I will also be reviewing the additional evidence provided by both parties." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The decision wasn't made. Not yet. As we left the courtroom, I could barely look at Michael. His innocent face was filled with confusion, and I hated myself for putting him through this. I hated myself for not being enough. But deep down, I knew I was. I just had to believe it. The waiting was unbearable. Days stretched into weeks, and every minute felt like an eternity. Every time my phone rang, I jumped, half hoping it was the court, half dreading it. The uncertainty gnawed at me, pulling at my mind, making it harder to breathe. Every time I looked at Michael, I saw the worry in his eyes. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew something was off. He could feel the tension, the strain between us and the world that seemed to be spinning faster than I could catch up. I tried to keep things normal. We spent our evenings watching his favorite cartoons, and weekends were filled with trips to the park or baking cookies in the kitchen. But behind the smiles and laughter, I was constantly watching the clock, wondering when the next bombshell would drop. Would it be good news? Or would it be another crushing blow? I wasn't alone in my thoughts, though. I knew my ex was waiting too. I could feel his presence in every little thing, his lawyer's phone calls, the brief meetings they had. I could see the way he acted in the courtroom, how his arrogance oozed from every movement. It made my blood boil. He wasn't just fighting for custody, he was fighting to take everything from me, everything I had built for Michael and myself. It was late one evening when I finally got the call. It was from my lawyer. The voice on the other end was calm, but firm. "Amanda, the judge has made a decision. You need to come in tomorrow morning to hear it in person." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent so much time wondering what the outcome would be, but now that it was here, I didn't feel ready. I wasn't ready to hear what the judge would say. I had done everything in my power to fight for my son, but would it be enough? I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, my thoughts racing, running over every conversation, every piece of evidence, every word I had said in the courtroom. What if I hadn't done enough? What if the judge didn't believe me? What if I lost Michael? The next morning, I took a deep breath before stepping out the door. Michael had already left for school, and I knew he was probably anxious about the outcome too. I kissed him goodbye that morning, but I didn't tell him about the court hearing. I didn't want him to worry more than he already was. The drive to my lawyer's office was a blur. I barely registered the passing streets, the rush of cars, the way the world seemed to move around me. All I could think about was what was waiting for me at the end of this ride. The meeting felt like a final exam, the moment where everything I had done up until now would either lead to success or failure. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, my nerves tightening with every passing second. When I arrived, my lawyer was already waiting for me. She stood up as I entered, her face serious. She motioned for me to sit, and I did, my stomach tight with anticipation. "Here's the situation," she began. "The judge has ruled that custody of Michael will remain with you, but there are some conditions. You'll need to continue with therapy, and there will be regular evaluations to ensure your emotional stability. There will also be supervised visits with your ex to ensure there's no conflict with Michael's well-being." The words hit me like a tidal wave, and for a moment, I couldn't process them. I was in shock. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected him to make such a compromise. The idea that the judge had ruled in my favor, even with those conditions, felt surreal. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. My lawyer continued. "It's not a perfect outcome, but it's not a loss either. The most important thing is that you still have custody. This gives you time to prove that you're the best person for Michael." I nodded, slowly coming back to myself. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was enough. Michael was staying with me. That's what mattered. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming, but it was still tinged with uncertainty. There was more work to do, more hurdles to jump, but I could handle it. The phone rang again. It was Michael's school. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, Mrs. Reyes. This is Mrs. Keller from Michael's school. We have a bit of an issue. It's not anything major, but Michael has been a bit withdrawn lately. He seems more anxious than usual, and we're concerned." My stomach dropped. It hadn't been more than a few hours since I had received the news, and already the cracks were showing. Michael wasn't okay. Not completely. He wasn't as unaffected as I had hoped. I thanked the teacher and hung up. This was far from over. The relief of winning the custody case was a short-lived victory. It didn't erase the damage that had been done. My son needed healing too, and I wasn't sure how to fix him when I was still trying to fix myself. I spent the rest of the afternoon with him after school, doing my best to keep things normal. We went to the park, got ice cream, and spent time together, just the two of us. But in the back of my mind, I knew that this wasn't the end. The real battle wasn't over yet. I had won the fight for custody, but the war was far from done. And I wouldn't stop fighting, not for my son, not for myself. I had already come too far. Later that night, I sat down to write in my journal, the words spilling out as they always did when I needed to process my thoughts. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but today, we have each other. Today, we're okay. I closed the journal, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't a perfect day, but it was the start of something new. And for now, that was enough. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, therapy sessions, and trying to keep some semblance of normalcy for Michael. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but now, at least I had a sense of direction. I had to keep proving that I was the right choice for him, that I was the mother he needed. But as the weeks went on, I began to notice something. Michael wasn't bouncing back like I had hoped. Sure, we were still doing all the fun things we always did together, play dates, visits to his favorite spots. But there was an underlying tension that I couldn't shake. His smile never quite reached his eyes anymore, and he seemed more withdrawn than ever. I could tell something was wrong, but he wouldn't talk to me about it. I had a conversation with his therapist one afternoon, trying to get a clearer picture of what was going on inside his head. "He's carrying a lot right now," Dr. Harrell, the therapist, said. "The custody battle, the emotional weight of it, it's affecting him more than you realize." I listened as Dr. Harrell explained how children process stress differently and how Michael might be internalizing things in ways that were difficult to articulate. It stung, hearing that my son was still carrying that weight, despite everything I had done to shield him from it. But even though it was painful to hear, it gave me a clearer understanding. Michael wasn't okay, and it wasn't something I could fix with a few trips to the park or ice cream outings. He needed real help, and I was going to make sure he got it. We started seeing Dr. Harrell more regularly, and while I hoped it would help Michael, I wasn't prepared for the emotional roller coaster it would put me through. Every session seemed to open up new wounds, both for him and for me. But it was necessary. Michael needed to talk, to release the anxiety he was feeling. I needed to help him do that. One day, after a particularly tough therapy session, Michael said something that shattered me. We were sitting in the car, on our way home, and he spoke up quietly. "Mom, why doesn't Dad want to live with us?" The question hit me like a slap. It was simple, innocent, but it was a reminder of how deeply the situation had affected him. I had been so focused on my own battles that I hadn't stopped to think about how my son was interpreting everything. "Sweetheart, your dad and we're just in a really tough spot right now," I said, my voice trembling. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you. Always." He didn't respond, but I could see the questions still swirling in his mind. I had tried to shield him from the worst of it, but how could I explain the complexities of divorce and custody to a child who just wanted his family back together? That night, as I tucked Michael into bed, I realized something important. This fight for custody wasn't just about the legal battle, the paperwork, or the court decisions. It was about healing. For both of us. We had both been through so much: his father's absence, the instability in our lives, the constant stress of the court case. But now, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about finding a way to move forward, to thrive despite all the obstacles. As I kissed Michael goodnight, I promised myself I would do whatever it took to help him heal. He needed more than just stability. He needed the chance to be a kid again, to feel safe, to feel whole. In the days that followed, I began to focus more on his needs, rather than just the logistics of our situation. I knew the road ahead would be long, but I wasn't going to let Michael walk it alone. We were going to rebuild together, no matter how difficult it got. The case was far from over, but for the first time in a while, I felt like we were making progress. Every day I saw small improvements in Michael. He started to smile more, to engage with the world around him again. He even started talking about his dreams at night, a small but significant sign that he was starting to feel a sense of security again. But just as things seemed to be getting better, my ex pulled another move. He filed for an emergency hearing, claiming that I was unfit to care for Michael and that he needed full custody. His lawyer's arguments were weak, but they didn't need to be strong. They only needed to sow doubt in the judge's mind. It was a power play, one I had feared all along. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the papers in front of me, my heart sinking with every word. The old panic started creeping back in, the familiar fear that I was about to lose everything again. I couldn't let that happen, not after everything we had been through. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week, and once again I found myself in a fight for my son's future. But this time, I wasn't going to play defense. I wasn't going to sit back and let my ex dictate the terms of our lives. I reached out to my lawyer immediately. We had no choice but to fight back, and we were going to do it hard. There was no room for weakness now. I had to protect Michael, and I was willing to do anything necessary to keep him safe. But as the days drew closer to the hearing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. I spent the next few nights preparing. I gathered every document, every piece of evidence that would prove I was the better parent. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the evidence. It was about Michael. No matter what happened in that courtroom, I had to remember one thing. I was his mother. And I wasn't going to lose him. Not without a fight. The day of the emergency hearing arrived faster than I could have imagined. It felt like the world was moving in fast forward, and I was barely holding on. I took a deep breath as I entered the courthouse, Michael's small backpack slung over my shoulder. He had begged to come with me, but I had explained that this was an adult matter. I hated not being able to tell him everything, but there were some things I couldn't explain in ways he would understand. I arrived early, as usual, hoping to gather my thoughts before everything began. My lawyer met me in the hallway, her face set in a determined expression, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. She knew how high the stakes were, and so did I. "Just stay calm, Amanda," she said softly as she led me into the courtroom. "We have this. We just need to stay focused." I nodded, but inside, I felt anything but calm. I had been through this before, but this time was different. This wasn't just about me, this was about Michael's future, and I wasn't about to let him go. The courtroom filled quickly. I could feel the tension in the air. I sat at the table, waiting for the hearing to begin, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. I couldn't stop thinking about the night before, when Michael had come to me and told me about a letter he had found in his father's old things. The letter. I had almost forgotten about it. It had slipped my mind amidst the chaos of the case, but when Michael handed it to me, my heart sank. The letter was from his father, written long before our marriage ended, and it was clear that he had hidden it away for years. The words on the page were a shocking admission of guilt, a confession that I had never expected to read. "I never wanted to be a father," the letter began, but I felt trapped. I didn't know how to get out, and I made mistakes. I don't deserve to be a part of Michael's life, but I want him to know that I love him. I only hope one day he can forgive me. It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from him, but it wasn't just that. It was the revelation that he had never truly wanted to be a father, and somehow that letter had made everything click into place for me. I understood why he had fought so hard to take Michael away from me. He didn't want to be a father, he just wanted to control everything. It wasn't about Michael. It was about power. I had shown the letter to my lawyer, and we both knew its weight. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was evidence of his true intentions, and it had the potential to turn the entire case on its head. As the hearing began, I sat at the table, my heart pounding in my chest. My ex's lawyer started off with his usual arguments, attacking my character, questioning my ability to care for Michael. It was the same old story, but this time I wasn't just sitting there taking it. I was ready. My lawyer stood up to speak, and I could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on me. She held up the letter, her voice steady as she read aloud the key parts of it. The room fell silent as the words sank in. "This letter," my lawyer said, "was written by the defendant himself. It clearly shows that he never wanted to be a father, that he was trapped in a situation he didn't want, and that he acknowledges his inability to be a proper parent. How can he now stand here and demand full custody of his son when he has admitted in writing that he is unfit to raise him?" There was a shift in the room. I could feel it, like the air had been sucked out of the space. Even my ex looked stunned. I had never seen him so speechless. The judge, who had been quiet up until that point, finally spoke. "Mr. Reyes," he said, his voice sharp, "you made your case. But now, we have undeniable proof of your intentions. It's clear that your actions throughout this case have been motivated by something other than the well-being of your child." My ex's face turned red, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. It was as if the power he had once wielded over me had been stripped away, piece by piece. He didn't know how to respond, how to salvage what little credibility he had left. My heart raced as the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Reyes, you have shown us that you are committed to your son's well-being. You have fought for him, and it is clear that you are the one who has his best interests at heart. The court rules that custody will remain with you. Your ex will have supervised visits until further notice." I couldn't breathe for a moment. The words hung in the air, and for a second it didn't feel real. But when I finally exhaled, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. The battle was over. The fight for Michael's future had been won. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky but my heart full. I looked around the courtroom, seeing the stunned expressions of the people who had witnessed this moment. The victory was bittersweet. It wasn't just about me, it was about Michael, about our future together. As I walked out of the courtroom, I thought of Michael waiting at home. He had no idea what had just happened, but he would soon know. His mother had won. We had won. I went straight to him, my heart full of love, and when I held him in my arms, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. This was just the beginning of a new chapter. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to get back at my ex. What mattered now was building the life Michael deserved, and I would do whatever it took to make sure he had that life.